the US Army went into action in North Africa, its infantry regiments had an organic cannon company with half-track mounted self-propelled howitzers. Soon after, they pivoted to towed howitzers to lighten the load in 1943 and 44. However, things were a little different in Pacific and Italy. While the Pacific lacked armored divisions, leg infantry regiments saw significant additions of organic armored vehicles in the last 2 years of the war. Among these were M7 Priests, a self-propelled howitzer more at home in armored divisions than infantry divisions. Further, units fighting in Italy and southern France often retained an earlier version of the cannon company that was equipped with half-track mounted artillery. Really, this was the most interesting subunit in the infantry regiment in my opinion. Today, we're going over the organizational history of the US Army Infantry Regiment's artillery from World War I through World War II, why they decided to add or retain SPGs in regiments outside of the ETO, lessons learned from combat, and the detailed organization of these modified cannon companies. But first, this week's organizational factoid: artillery battalions in the battle orderverse are actually designated as brigades. Look up British Army artillery brigades in World War I to learn more about that quirk. All the traditions are stored in the batteries. I'm gonna start giving hints about these task forces since getting a military world building video out about them is obviously taking a while. But yeah, join up, get access to exclusive videos in the Discord. You guys are the only reason this channel is still running. For now though, we return to the story. The story of regimental artillery support was somewhat tumultuous before 1942, as most things in the US Army were. After the US entered World War I, it added a sapper and bomber platoon and a 1-pounder gun platoon to its AEF-type infantry regiments, contained within the HQ company. The former had 6 3-inch Stokes mortars, while the latter had 3 37mm M1916 guns. In these early days of American infantry regiments being more than just blobs of riflemen, the infantry battalions didn't have their own mortars. In other words, there was nothing between the rifle grenade and the regimental pieces. In the big post-war reorg of 1920-21, these weapons were moved into a newly formed howitzer company. Initially, they had 3 mortars manned, 3 spare mortars, and 3 guns, although the 3 spare mortars were removed by 1927. It was called that despite not having any howitzers, because they intended to replace both, but especially the maligned 3-inch mortar, with a howitzer. This ultimately didn't happen though, and the howitzer companies were left in this unsatisfactory state until they were finally gotten rid of in favor of battalion-level 81mm mortars and regimental 37mm anti-tank guns in 1938-39. Kind of a sad sack of a story. However, regimental artillery came back somewhat more competently shortly after the US entered World War II. The new 1942 organization the US would take into North Africa and the Guadalcanal campaigns added a regimental cannon company. This new company was intended to supplement the field artillery, of which the division had 1 battalion of direct support artillery per infantry regiment, plus a battalion in general support. The basic difference was while the field artillery was usually to be employed against area targets and would likely be somewhat busy with the overall division fire plan, deep fires, and counter battery, the cannon company would handle more transient targets and point targets of opportunity that pop up in the infantry regiment's way. Machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, pillboxes, fortified buildings, roadblocks, halted armored vehicles, troop concentrations, and stuff like that. The cannon company was also meant to supplement the regimental anti-tank company in the anti-mechanized defense, although generally against halted vehicles. The 1942 cannon company was actually quite a bit of stuff for the time. The aesthetics had much more of an armored division feel to them. Each company consisted of an HQ platoon, 2 75mm howitzer platoons, and 1 105mm howitzer platoon. The 75 platoons had 3 self-propelled howitzers each, while the 105 platoon had 2. As of Table of Basic Allowances 7 in June 1942, which was before Operation Torch, these were meant to be 75mm howitzer motor carriages M8 and 105mm howitzer motor carriages M7 respectively. The company also had 5 SCR 536 handy-talkie radios, which was intended as one for the company headquarters, one for a moving commander, executive officer, or company OP, and one for each platoon. However, substitutes had to be used in some cases as the M7 only began production in April 1942 and the M8 in September of 1942. The 75 substitute was meant to be the 75mm howitzer motor carriage T30 mounting an M1 pack howitzer, but could be the 75mm gun motor carriage M3, also known by its T12 developmental designation. which mounted the French M1897 field gun, making it more of a tank destroyer. Notably, the only infantry TO&E formally including the M3 was the Air Base Security Battalion, but you take what you can get. As the M3 was actually type classified, it was much more numerous. The 105 substitute meanwhile was the Howitzer motor carriage T-19 mounting the M2A1 Howitzer, although it appears some units went into action with their intended M7 HMCs during Operation Torch. Such was the case for the 16th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division landing at Arzew. Examples of the intended equipment could later be seen in Italy and the Pacific in 1943 and 44. For example, on Saipan in June of 1944, the 106th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division operated a cannon company with 2 howitzer motor carriages M7 mounting the M2A1 105mm howitzer on an M3 tank chassis, and 6 howitzer motor carriages M8, essentially M5 Stuarts with a 75mm howitzer. Generally, the US tried to avoid unnecessary reorganization of already deployed units, so a simple swap out of the old items with the new would suffice. Many cannon companies in Italy also continued to operate self-propelled platforms for similar reasons. However, about a year before the Allied returned to France, the Army issued a new TO&E for cannon companies that got rid of the SPGs. Really, the Big Army wanted to get rid of it entirely. The AGF Reduction Board was attempting to cut weight everywhere it could after North Africa, and the Cannon Company had the only armored vehicles in the regiment. As a result, the Cannon Company was tentatively eliminated in March 1943 and replaced with 3 towed howitzer platoons directly under the HQ Company. That wouldn't actually go into effect though, as the new TO&E was overall extremely unpopular among field commanders. In a revised set of tables issued in July of 1943, the Cannon Company was brought back, but instead of gunning with half-tracks, they had M3 105mm howitzers. These howitzers were towed by WC-63 1.5-ton cargo trucks instead of being self-propelled. The new company was organized into a headquarters and 3 cannon platoons. Each cannon platoon had its own HQ with a jeep and a deuce-and-a-half truck with trailer, and 2 howitzer sections. This allowed for 1 platoon to be distributed to the regiment's 2 leading battalions, with a 3rd kept in general support of the entire regiment. Single guns could even be temporarily attached to rifle companies, although this was much more common in the Pacific than Europe due to their different equipment. The cannon company could also be centralized to support the regiment as a whole. In Europe, though, they'd often be tied in with a direct support field artillery battalion. The company commander or his reconnaissance officer would act as the liaison between the company and the regimental commander, or the commander of the field artillery battalion in direct support of the regiment. The platoon commanders or their agents would be the liaisons between their platoons and the smaller units they were attached to, like a battalion. The story was a bit different in the Pacific though. In February of 1944, the Army released a special TO&E for cannon companies that could be authorized in place of the towed version. The new structure looked much like the base cannon company with 3 cannon platoons. However, instead of towed M3s, they were authorized self-propelled M7s, the standard field artillery of the armored division. For some Pacific deployed units, the new M7s replaced 81mm mortars or other equipment they'd been using in lieu of howitzers. Such was the case for the 128th Infantry, 32nd Division as it was preparing for the Philippines on Hollandia. For others, the M7 was the first artillery piece they were issued full stop. The cannon company of the 27th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division without their cannons were quite unceremoniously saddled with mule duty during the Guadalcanal and New Georgia campaigns. Many such cases during the US Army's first year of combat in the Pacific, where terrain was totally unsuitable for heavy weapons and vehicles. It wasn't until June of 1944 on New Caledonia that the 27th Infantry's Cannon Company received M7s, which they'd employ after landing in the Philippines in January of 1945. This included blasting some tanks of the Japanese 2nd Tank Division. Other companies were entirely equipped with M8 HMCs for a time. The M8 was 16,000 pounds lighter than the M7, so it had some advantages in the rugged terrain. Getting the 128th Infantry's M7s up the GO trails of Villa Verde and Luzon required heavy engineer support to widen the roads, although MacArthur's persuasion with regards to division structure could best be described as engineers be damned, I want the firepower. At the same time, the 77th Infantry Division's assessment post-Okinawa was that the M8 weighing under 20 tons was successful, but the M7 was too heavy. Something similar played out during amphibious operations in Italy as well. During Operation Avalanche, the landings near Salerno, the 141st Infantry 36th Division was able to land their 75mm SPs early in the assault waves due to their ability to be readily landed in LCM-3s. The 143rd Infantry's commander stated the arrival of the regiment's cannon company was considered a material factor in repelling a serious threat from tanks during the operation. They were declared more effective against machine guns, personnel, and tanks in the early stages than towed 57mm AT guns due to their maneuverability. Additionally, field artillery observers apparently didn't have working radios just after landing, so they relied on the cannon company for firing on-call targets. Note that these reports are ambiguous as to whether these are T-30 howitzers or M3 guns. Both saw combat in Italy. Difficulties were encountered loading the 30-ton medium tanks into LCMs, resulting in them being landed hours later than anticipated. The 105mm M7 was likewise deemed too heavy to bring ashore in an LCM by the RCT commander and difficult to hide by the Divardi commander. By January of 1944, the 141st was still fighting with its self-propelled mounts. Later that year, operations reports and unit journals out of the 7th Infantry Regiment 3rd Division in August 1944 state their cannon companies had 105mm M7s and 75mm M8s. This shows even that late into 1944, the first 1942 organization was still getting use in the European theater, albeit among units that were staged in the Mediterranean theater. Even more rarely, the 157th Regiment of the 45th Division kept its T-30 half-track mounted 75mm howitzers all the way into Germany in 1945. The 45th entered combat in Italy and landed in southern France during Operation Dragoon, same as the 3rd and 36th. In addition to being lighter, the M8 also had smaller openings in the roof, making it slightly less vulnerable to mortar fire. That played out in the combat experience of the 106th Regiment on Saipan. Quote, the enemy had taken refuge in ledges and caves just below the crest of the hill, and from there commenced lobbing hand grenades up into the line of the Americans on top. The M7s failed to accomplish the mission and had to retreat when the Japanese began dropping mortar shells on them. As a last resort, Captain Chasmar sent up some M8 self-propelled mounts. For half an hour, the M8s plugged away at the sides of the cliffs, forcing many of the enemy into the open where they could be picked off by riflemen. Interestingly, the beefing up of the Pacific Infantry regiments wasn't limited to the cannon companies. For example, it's noted that the 96th Infantry Division on Okinawa, in addition to a full complement of 18 M7 priests for its 3 regiments, had 36 M18 76mm gun motor carriages. This battalion's worth of tank destroyers was enough to fully replace the 57mm anti-tank guns contained within each infantry regiment's anti-tank company. The 77th Division referred to the 57s as man-killers by comparison, due to having to be pushed into position for offensive action. As a result, the 77th Division used M10 3-inch tank destroyers in its regimental anti-tank companies as early as Guam. While it was praised as combat effective, it could not keep up with the attack on Leyte due to exceeding bridge capacities. For this reason, the 77th switched to the M18 76mm tank destroyer for Okinawa, and it was well loved against pillboxes and caves. If the war had gone on, infantry regiments participating in the invasion of Japan would have undoubtedly included some armor. For example, 9 Corps' Operation Olympic Administrative Order No. 1 called for 1 spare M7 priest to be carried per infantry regiment cannon company. This corps included the 77th, 81st, and 98th Infantry Divisions and would act as the Army's reserve afloat and diversionary force for the invasion of Kyushu in November of 1945. Interesting tidbit if you're doing some sort of Operation Downfall war game. So why was all this done? The harsh terrain of the Pacific was not something the US Army was prepared for, and trucks towing howitzers were likely to struggle off-road. A fully tracked self-propelled howitzer would be more likely to handle soft ground, even if it added an additional engineering and logistical burden. Except for the Philippines, road networks were poor or non-existent. Although praise of any platform isn't universal, it's noted in the official Army history on Leyte that the 96th Division found the cannon company's self-propelled 105mm howitzer extremely mobile in swamps and mountainous terrain. It was able to go several miles further up the mountains than any other vehicle and gave excellent support in covering the mountain passes. They also gave high marks to the M29 Weasel cargo carrier, fun fact. CLGC member for sure. The ETO General Board Study Number 15, one of the reports making recommendations on how the Army should restructure after the war, stated towed cannon companies in the ETO were broadly incapable of doing their job because they were towed. It was often tied in with the division artillery as a sort of fourth battery. I'm sure some company to regimental officers liked their cannon companies, but it was definitely the sentiment at echelons above division that regimental guns had to be self-propelled. Ironically, this led to the ETO General Board recommending the adoption of 105mm self-propelled howitzers for this role, independent of what was going on in the Pacific. Although the General Board came after victory in Japan, the dislike of the M3 resulted in changes just after victory in Europe. The June 1945 redeployment TO&Es designed for units being sent over from Europe to invade Japan replaced the 6 towed howitzers with 9 T-26E2 heavy tanks, what would be type classified as the M45 after the war. The T-26E2 was a version of the M26 Pershing with a 105mm howitzer for assault gun duty. Apparently 185 were produced in 1945, and M45s did go on to serve in Korea, so if the war went on until 1946, perhaps a regiment here or there would have gotten some Pershings. It seems by January of 1946, the special TO&E with M7 priests was no longer in circulation, so it is possible that by Operation Coronet, the second half of Operation Downfall, the 9 M45 version may have been used among follow-on divisions. Although really, M4A3 105 Shermans would have probably been the preponderance of regimental guns simply due to availability. The authorized substitutes in this TO&E were the M4A3 medium tank, followed by the new 105mm howitzer motor carriage M37. As the M37 was a replacement for the M7, I think it's probably safe to assume the M7 would have been the fourth string option. Further, at a whopping 46 tons, the M45 didn't have one of the characteristics that motivated some divisions in the Pacific to replace the comparatively petite 23.5-ton M7 with the 17.3-ton M8. But at the same time, in addition to the terrain problem, protection and self-propelled mobility made howitzer motor carriages a naturally better fit for the direct fire roles common in the Pacific. If a bunker needed to be blasted with dozens upon dozens of HE rounds, attracting machine gun and mortar fire while doing it, a towed M3 howitzer would certainly be an unwieldy instrument for such a task. In the 128th Infantry's report on operations in the Philippines, platoons of the Cannon Company were often task organized with platoons of the Anti-Tank Company to cover certain approaches. It's also stated, during the first week of April of 1945, medium tanks of Company B, 775th Tank Battalion, and M7s of Regimental Cannon Company made their appearance on the Villa Verde Trail and closely supported the forward elements of the regiment by direct fire on targets of opportunity. This was perilous work though, and some situations revealed the howitzer motor carriages lacking protection when compared to a tank. From the 127th Infantry 36th Division during the Northern Luzon campaign, on moving into open terrain, the M7 supporting Company K received a direct hit on its mount from an enemy AT gun. The gunner was seriously wounded and 5 crew members were slightly wounded. The tank withdrew and artillery fire was directed on the gun position. That regiment's 30th lesson learned from the campaign was to teach infantry combined arms cooperation with M7s and tanks. Not a typical bullet point in the ETO. This also demonstrated single M7s being used to support certain rifle companies in an assault gun type role. Except for the Cannon Company's dual role as an indirect fire weapon, all of the armored platforms kind of did similar things to various degrees. Although tanks are of course going to be better at standing shoulder to shoulder with infantry during an open attack. But for exploiting amphibious landings and cave warfare, whether these pieces were called anti-tank guns, Cannon Company weapons, tanks, or tank destroyers made little difference, per the 77th Division's report on Okinawa. Meanwhile in the ETO, when units did get a gun shield for their towed howitzers, they often discarded it as unnecessary weight, so blasting targets point blank was not likely to be a common role there. Now for the detailed organization of the M7 equipped Cannon Company, starting at the base. The howitzer section consisted of one howitzer motor carriage. Oddly, an M10 ammunition trailer isn't stated in the TO&E, unlike the Armored Field Artillery Battery where it was explicitly allocated at 1 per howitzer. Although it's known that at least some units use the M10 trailers in practice. For example, the Cannon Company of the 27th Regiment, 25th Division definitely had one M10 trailer per M7. An M10 ammo trailer could carry about 44 complete rounds of 105mm. They did, however, have an SCR-300 radio not included in the Field Artillery's M7 section. The M7 batteries and Field Artillery only had 6 radios total, and these were SCR-506, 508, 510, and 528 types. Everything else was done by field telephone. In any case though, the section consisted of 7 men. The Chief of Section ranking Sergeant, Gunner ranking Corporal, 2 Cannoneers mostly Privates First Class, 2 Ammo Handlers mostly Privates First Class, and 1 tank driver, either a technician 4th or 5th grade, equivalent to a sergeant or corporal. The Chief of Section was armed with an M1 rifle, the tank driver with a submachine gun, while everyone else got an M1 carbine. The M7 itself had a caliber 50 heavy machine gun mounted. This was most likely manned by the No. 1 Cannoneer. Each cannon platoon had 2 howitzer sections. Above them was a platoon HQ with 1 officer, 6 enlisted, 1 2.5-ton truck with a 1-ton trailer, and 1 jeep with a 1/4-ton trailer. This included the platoon commander, one of which per company was a 1st lieutenant, while the other 2 were 2nd lieutenants. A platoon sergeant ranking technical sergeant, like today's sergeant first class, an agent ranking corporal, instrument corporal, radio telephone operator, light truck driver driving a 2.5-ton truck, and messenger driving the platoon's jeep. Before the May change No. 1, the instrument corporal was an instrument operator ranking PFC or private. The instrument operator was a fire control specialist. This trade was renamed a Fire Direction Center operator in April of 1945. External to the cannon company, there were also 3 company aidmen in the regimental medical detachment earmarked specifically for the cannon company, so we can assume 1 per cannon platoon roughly. These theoretically could have been anywhere from private to technician 3rd grade equivalent to a staff sergeant, although T3s and T4s were less numerous. In a squad of 8 company aidmen covering the regimental companies, there was 1 T3, 3 T4s, 2 T5s, and 2 privates or PFCs. The light truck driver was armed with an M1 rifle and M7 grenade launcher. The messenger had an M1 carbine and M8 grenade launcher. Each platoon HQ also got a bazooka 2.36-inch rocket launcher for local anti-tank defense. Doctrinally, the platoon commander, his RTO, and agent would be co-located with the unit they were supporting, while the platoon sergeant controlled the action at the firing position. Each cannon company consisted of 3 of these platoons. Above them was the company headquarters. As of June 30th, 1944, this consisted of 2 officers and 25 enlisted. A WC-63 1.5-ton cargo truck with caliber 50 HMG, a 3/4-ton weapons carrier, and 3 jeeps, 2 of which towed trailers. Buckle in because this is a long list of guys. It consisted of the company commander ranking captain, reconnaissance officer also acting as second in command ranking 1st lieutenant, 1st sergeant, mess sergeant, reconnaissance sergeant, supply sergeant, transportation sergeant, communications sergeant, company clerk also qualified as a classification specialist, basically a guy who can assign soldiers to proper jobs based on their past qualifications, an armor artificer, bugler, 2 cooks, 2 cooks helpers, 1 light truck driver, 1 artillery mechanic, 1 automobile mechanic, 1 tank mechanic, 2 messengers, 2 radio telephone operators, and 4 basics, basically a source of internal replacements. Before the June change No. 2, this was 8 basics. The 2 messengers and bugler drove the HQ's 3 jeeps. The light truck driver, meanwhile, drove the WC-63 1.5-ton cargo truck, and the automobile mechanic drove a 3/4-ton weapons carrier. Unlike the field artillery version of the battery HQ, they didn't bother breaking this out into headquarters, maintenance, and administrative mess and supply sections on the TO&E itself. Cannon Company doctrine just divided them into a command group and an admin group, which was usually co-located with the regimental service company, or in the case of the clerk, the regiment S1. So what should you take away from this video? Well, first of all, the Cannon Company was probably the most interesting thing about the US Army's infantry regiment organizationally because every theater did something different. In the ETO, units that came in through the north of France appear to have generally gotten towed M3 howitzers as the base TO&E and actual field manuals dictated. This seems to have been a fairly top-down decision though, motivated by shipping economy, since armies engaged in combat before 1944 kept their SPs, and the towed M3s were unpopular among high-level commanders that used them. MTO units seem to have generally retained their 1942 mixed self-propelled organization even after landing in southern France. Some even took the rare T-30 75mm SPs into Germany. And of course in the PTO, units also maintained the 1942 mixed self-propelled organization well into 1944, but as a rule switched to either fully M7 105mm as per a special TO&E or fully M8 75mm due to the weight advantage in harsh terrain. This highlights another maxim: different units, different opinions. Some units praised the M7 105mm for its ability to traverse harsh terrain. Others derided it for being too heavy to do so. There were lovers and haters in both the PTO and MTO. But while exact use varied by theater, the basic concept was more or less similar. Of course, the cannon companies wouldn't survive, as infantry regiments just took an M4 Sherman tank company and 4.2-inch heavy mortar company into Korea. That regimental tank company left the regiment during the Pentomic reorganization, and so went the idea of the assault gun organic to the light infantry brigade until the army failed to do it twice more. If you found this look at cannon companies interesting, you'd like what's over on my Patreon. If you sign up, you'll get some exclusive videos, private Discord server access, these shoutouts, and the knowledge it was you that made future videos possible. I'll see you over there.